Good morning. My name is Rhonda Brown. I'm the Vice President of Advancement here at the Chicago Theological Seminary, and I'm so glad to see so many bright, shining faces so early. I just have a few announcements before I introduce President Alice Hunt. A couple of things. Does everybody have a mobile phone? Can you please raise it in the air? We have created an app called RIOTcon. Please download the app as I'm talking, because I'm not that important. And make sure that you sign up to receive messages through the app. It is a fantastic piece of technology, and we are paperless. So we want everybody here to use the app. We want you to use hashtag RIOTcon 2016 in all of your social media throughout the conference. Please tweet. Please post pictures on Facebook and Instagram about your experience today at CTS. Our Twitter handle is at CTS_Chicago. We are at Chicago Theological Seminary on Facebook, and all of that information is on the one piece of paper you received today, which had your name tag and all the information you need. I also want to draw your attention on this document. Is the information about emergency exits. Please, if there is an emergency at any time during the conference, please refer to the maps and volunteers will direct you out. I think that's it. Oh, I also want to draw your attention to the artists in the room. Right here to my right is the Ink Factory, and during the plenary discussion as well as the panel, they'll be illustrating, graphically illustrating parts of the conversation.
Is there a way to support CTS on our mobile phone?
There is. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. On your mobile phone, there is an opportunity to make a contribution to CTS. If you text Give to CTS, number 2, from your mobile phones, and we will have this information for you throughout the day about supporting and contributing to CTS. You can make a $10 contribution through your mobile phone, and you can also go to our website and make an even bigger contribution throughout this event. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce President Alice Hunt.
Good morning. I like the energy in the room. On behalf of the Chicago Theological Seminary community, I want to welcome you to RIOTcon 2016, Mapping a Movement. Over the years, this conference has gone through several iterations. Even during my time as being president, I've seen it grow and change, take on different forms, serve different purposes. What started as a local gathering at CTS of alumni and ministers has expanded into this, a diverse interreligious caucus of artists, community organizers, scholars, students, faith leaders, philanthropists, all of us gathered together to explore how we might transform our community and our world toward greater justice and mercy. The magnitude of this conference is made possible by generous support from an anonymous donor and the Chicago Community Trust. Their gifts, combined with the support of our alumni, friends, and partner churches and organizations, make all of this possible. What you experienced this weekend is a snapshot of what we do at Chicago Theological Seminary every day. For 160 years, CTS has been a leader of progressive theological education. We train and equip religious leaders and activists alike. We have invited students and scholars from all over the world, from diverse experiences and backgrounds, to go together and explore passions for justice. Regardless of your faith tradition, regardless of your spiritual beliefs, I invite all of you to be seminarians with us this weekend. I invite you to be inspired by the speakers, workshops, and the people sitting next to you. May our collective passions motivate us, encourage us, and move us to informed action. Now, it is my privilege to introduce our first keynote speaker. A civil rights movement activist, minister, educator, and lecturer, Reverend Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr. is an authority on strategies of nonviolent social change. He co-founded the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1960, was a leader in the Nashville movement, the Freedom Rides, and the Selma movement. He directed the Alabama Voter Registration Project in 1962 and was appointed National Program Administrator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and National Coordinator of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign by Martin Luther King Jr. 50 years ago, he was an essential component of the Chicago Freedom Movement, working closely with Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. to bring greater justice and mercy to the people of Chicago. We are honored to have Reverend Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr. at Chicago Theological Seminary today.
Thank you very much, President. I want to say that I am extremely excited about being here with you, and moved when I think about 50 years ago, and we used to talk about the year 2020 as if it was some magical year, and here it comes. It's on the way. And I first want to acknowledge our authors of the book, Chicago Freedom Movement. So would you please stand, all those who contributed to the book itself, Mary Lou and Jim Ralph, all of those who participated. Could just stand for a moment. Here we are. Okay, very good. Let's give them a hand. And I want to also acknowledge that we are going to be paperless. Yes. Because I don't need any notes. Yeah. Because I've already noted quite a few things already. And I'm so moved by this event and this occasion. And the most important thing that I am really excited about is the fact we were able to complete this project, because during this period and this time, what we need to do is draw upon the experiences of the past. We can't really understand where we are unless we have an appreciation of an interpretation of what those past experiences were. Oh, the past did happen. The question is, what is our interpretation? Because it's not just simply the experiences that makes the day or either the person. It's the interpretation that really has the import. And I'm smiling now because I remember a preacher from my childhood, okay, Reverend Walker. And he had physical deformities, but he was incredible because he was one who was a lexicographer. Yes, he made up his own words. Like he would say when he would address an audience, I am behooved with the greatest of grandiosity. So these experiences help to not just simply interpret the experiences, okay, that we have, but it also helps to form our understanding of the future. Now, understanding is greater than wisdom. You can have all the knowledge and information, but if you don't have it, okay, an interpretation or understanding of it, then it doesn't make any difference. It's so important when we do our research that we also are not limited by the research. We must understand the research and interpret it. Now, when we focus on the Chicago movement, I just want to give you a few, okay, tidbits about how it started. First of all, you had organizations like TWO, which is in this area, okay? And those different organizations, Back of the Arts, they were community-based organizations. And they were organized in order to have a strength to preserve a culture. And that's what organizations do. They preserve culture. Whether it's a community organization, a religious organization, or fraternities, sororities, okay? Go down the list, all right? Yeah, that's the purpose. So as we look at the history of the Chicago movement, the thing that made it a movement is the fact that it was in motion. And when you move, you change, okay, the environment. When you stand still, then you simply are caught into that environment. But when you move, you necessarily change. You can't move and stay the same. So there's a difference between even a campaign and a movement. Martin Luther King, for example, was oriented towards a movement. And he was thoroughly and fascinated by Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi was not in his faith as a religious orientation, but Mahatma Gandhi was in his face. When he saw Mahatma Gandhi and what he was doing through his readings, of course, Martin Luther King could never be the same. Because many people read Mahatma Gandhi, but they don't understand that he was inclusive. I had a chance to go to the very spot where Mahatma Gandhi was killed in New Delhi. I saw the little table next to his little cot. And on that table, there was the New Testament, as well as his own religious book. Yeah, but he went beyond the book. So Martin Luther King, like Mahatma Gandhi, went beyond the book. If you get stuck on the book, you can't book. So you have to use the book as a springboard to get started in terms of movement. The unique thing about the Chicago movement compared to other movements is that the issues that were addressed in Chicago were multiple. It was a multiple movement. When you think about all these movements, they took place in specific cities, even though they were replicated in many other areas. These movements had geographical identity to a city, like when you say the Montgomery movement. You peg that to the bus boycott. When you say the Birmingham city, movement, the first picture you see is some firemen with water hose and some dogs. Oh, I need to tell you about this dog. Did you know there was a dog and his name was the N-word? Did you know that? In Birmingham, they had a dog, and that's what his name was. And guess what? You're talking about classism? That dog had a gold tooth. Yeah. And all you had to do is just use the word, the N-word, and that dog would go wild and start attacking black folks. Sound familiar? Black on black. The dog even knew who to attack. Yeah. There's some mysteries involved. When you think about the water hose, this is a fact now, okay? So be clear. There was one day when they put the water hose out and they were planning to wash these children down. That's why they use water hose. Did you know that? They thought the children were dirty. Okay? But also they thought they were on fire, because that's what the fire trucks are for. Okay, to put out fires. That's why they brought them. And they turned the hose, okay, with the wrench and that kind of thing from the hydrant, and no water would come out. They were on their knees. Yeah. Not only the protesters were on their knees, but the firemen were on their knees. No water would come out. I'll leave you with that to fathom, okay? I'm not going to try to make an interpretation. I'm just giving you facts down. All right? So when we think about these different cities, they are identified with specific issues that the campaign, okay, and the movement there. See, it becomes a campaign when you are determined that nothing will stop you. Well, it's like the presidential campaign. You know, they have some campaigns, and the campaign is over. In fact, it has a date on it. Movements, okay, there's no timetable. No. The boycott, at first it was a one-day boycott in Montgomery. And then Joanne, okay, Grant, who's a college professor, by the way, and she's the one that had her women's organization, and she's the one that came back and put out a flyer after the one-day boycott was successful, and the ministers were having a meeting trying to decide whether or not they should continue to boycott. This was December 5th. All right. Rosa Parks was arrested on the 1st, and the boycott was scheduled for the 5th. It was a trial. It was a one-day test to see if this thing would work. Joanne, all right, over at Alabama State, she started putting out flyers. And she put those flyers out, and they stayed up all night on the mimeograph machine. Some of you would know what that is. Okay, it was like a magical typewriter. It would duplicate things real fast, okay? Like the fax machine, whatever, okay? But guess what happened? The Montgomery Advertiser, which was a local newspaper there in Montgomery, was suspicious that these black folks were trying to start something to attack the buses. And you know what they did? They exposed them. They put the flyer on the front page. Yeah. Try to do something secret, okay? They put it out in the public. That meant everybody knew about the boycott, okay? Yeah. So, when we think about Chicago in comparison to the other movements, as we began to, the authors, discover things and identify those organizations and that sort of thing and different movements, it turned out that the Chicago movement never stopped moving. That's the unique thing about it. It never stopped moving. So it was not just a campaign. There were multiple issues in a movement. Now, some people are not aware of the roots of certain things. I just want to share that with you. And if it's permissible, I'd really like to get some questions, and so we can have some other things that maybe you can jog my memory, okay? How did the Operation Push start?
At Chicago Theological Seminary.
Yes. Almost. Jesse Jackson came to visit me when he found out I was in town. I was living over there on Woodlawn in 51st. And he knocked on my door. Al Raby used to live downstairs, and I had an apartment upstairs. That was before I, earlier lived with Bill Barry and his family. He was over the Urban League. So Jesse knocked on my door, and this big, tall, strapping, Negro with the lips. I looked at him, and the moment I saw him, I said, my goodness, this guy's going to be a great leader, because I have premonitions about things. And I said, oh, wow. So I teased him, and after 50 years, I can give you the whole story, okay? It's time to tell it all now. Tell it? Okay, I got permission to tell it. Okay. So I say, well, what are you doing? He said, he's over at the Chicago Theological Seminary. I said, what do you teach over there? And he was a student. He said, I'm a student. I say, are you going over to the white seminary to learn how to pastor black folks? And he said, well, dumb to dumb, okay. 2 weeks later, he organized a class on Saturdays here with students. Saturdays. That was the genesis, okay, of Operation Push. The original name for Operation Push was People United to Save Humanity. I said, don't be that ambitious. You know what I mean? Right, okay. This is just us, not Jesus, okay? That's all original, so I hope y'all recording all this. Yeah, this is paperless, okay? So he agreed, so it's people, okay, to serve humanity, united to serve humanity. That would be a better thing to do, okay? So I was the first director of Push Excel. That's to work with the youth, the children, because that's key to what we have to do. If we are not working with young people, we're not working. That means we are retired already, even though you may be drawing a salary. If not working with young folk. That's our mission. That's our goal. We have to do that. So I just want to say that this institution, this seminary has made a tremendous contribution over the years. Yeah, and still making contributions. Yeah, when I was at Emory University, we were sending students here. How about that? Yeah, we got one now over there. Sitting now. Used to be my assistant, okay, Quincy, right here, okay? Yeah. So what I'm saying is that as we began to research in preparing for the book, we discovered that many important efforts came out of the organizations, although we were united as as Coordinating Council of Community Organizations, okay? We also had these different other entities involved that were helping to make a difference. Now, I was working for the American Friends Service Committee by this time because the concept of bringing the movement north, all right? Now, you know how Martin Luther King got to Chicago? In addition to the speech, he made speeches all over the country. And we had to march here, of course, etc. But Martin Luther King had marches other places. In his final hours, he had a march in Memphis, but he didn't plan to have a movement. Many times, Martin Luther King was what you would call cultivating. He was spreading seeds in different places to see which seeds would take, get some roots. But that had to be left up to the local people. All right? So what happened was actually Martin Luther King was not supposed to come to Chicago for the Northern movement. It was Rochester, New York. And there was a riot in Rochester, and I was in Chicago, and Martin Luther King sent for me to join his staff in Rochester because I had some experience with, nonviolence in the northern urban community. So I worked with AFSC, the Urban Affairs Program. I was director of that. And the whole idea was to see if nonviolence could work in the ghetto. That's what we used to call it. So I was up here experimenting, working with the gangs. Now, this is going to surprise you, and those who are standing up, be sure you're holding on to something. The Vice Lords. And you know what the Vice Lords, that was a gang. And that was just not the name of the gang. That was the work of the gang. They call themselves Vice Lords, assistant to the Lord. Yeah, Vice Lords. Okay? Yeah, God's right-hand folk. That's what they call themselves. They didn't fool around. Now, guess what? We start training the gangs in nonviolence. Yeah, that's what we were doing on the West Side, training them. Now, here's the thing that you got to hold on to, even if you sit down. Did you know the vice lords were marshals on the Selma March? Yeah. If you look at some of the footage on the Selma March, there's a fellow carrying the American flag with a beret backwards on his head. That's Lamar McCoy, one of the heads of the, vice lords. That was boot camp. Selma was boot camp for the Marquette, march and demonstration. That's why they were so effective. And that's why we didn't have blacks breaking out in violence on the march in Marquette. There was violence, but it was from whites. You didn't have black folks fighting white folks over in Marquette Park, because the folks who would have been fighting the white folks were marshals for the nonviolent march. That's what we're talking about. Okay? Changing the roles. Those who would be involved in violence were involved, but not in violence. Yeah. And we used them because they had experience already. Some of them had their teeth knocked out, some of them had scars, and some had bullets. Not just holes, but bullets. They were experienced people. So they were good marshals. They would have knocked down bottles and things and cherry bombs, all the things that were thrown at us. So therefore, we used the people with that kind of experience, people who had gone to jail. I remember an interesting thing when I was in Chicago. I went to jail. But that was not my plan. Now, I've been to jail 27 times, and been kidnapped twice, once in Latin America, down in Colombia, kidnapped by the FARC, all right. So going to jail or getting that wasn't a problem for me, all right. But I'm dressed up, and everything, and the gang members asked me to train them in nonviolence. So I said, okay, all right. They were going to go sit in, at the school board meeting here in Atlanta. That was their first nonviolent action. So they wanted to be trained. They didn't just want to go down there and, because the process was that you go to the school board meeting and you try to talk, and they won't let you talk because you're trying to express, your views as a citizen, that kind of thing. And they would shut you down, and sometimes they would pull you out of the meeting. So these gang members wanted to be trained. Jimmy Wilson was one of them. It was his idea. So I gave them training for about a week. And then we set a time, and they were going to go down and do that. And then they looked at me, and they said, aren't you going with us to be arrested? I said, I got my work to do. I got to work. So they said, no, we've never done this before, so we need you to, go with us. So in case if we run into something that we don't know how to handle. So I said, well, I hadn't planned, to go. So I said, well, how am I going to leave my job? So I went to Cale Williams and told him that I had to go to jail. And I didn't want his board to get upset and say, well, we're not, paying him to go to jail and all that business, So Cale Williams gave me a leave of absence with pay. Yeah, so I'm talking to administrators how you can handle these things, okay? All right. Yeah. So that's what I did. And you know what they did when we were in jail, in Cook County Jail? They separated us because they didn't want a hunger strike, so they separated the leaders, okay? And guess where they put us? Put Jimmy Wilson and I in the psychiatric ward. Yeah. So every morning, this guy across from us got up and put his suit on and everything. Was a white businessman. And he would say, could y'all call me a cab? So I said, call you a cab? You know, he's in jail, locked behind the bars. Okay. So I say, call you a cab? You are a cab. Mm-hmm. So every morning we had to, call him a cab. So we went on the hunger strike. And we had, Jimmy wanted to throw the food in there because it was good food. I mean, they turned it on. And he wanted to, throw it in the thing. I said, no, because they'll think we ate it, Jimmy. So you got to leave the food there so people could see that you didn't eat it. I said, okay, all right. So we saw that food. So it's one thing to go on a hunger strike, it's another is your eyes distract the food every day. That's a more serious strike. Yeah. So we did it, and we finally got out of there. But what I wanted to say is the thing that made the difference in the Chicago movement was the fact that people from various organizations and various movements moved, okay? Why did Martin Luther King come to Chicago? He was going to announce Rochester, New York, because Andrew Young had convinced him that the, Congregational Church, okay, had raised the money in Rochester, New York to fund the movement, because that's always a problem, funds, okay? But when Martin Luther King called the press conference, okay, he had to announce where he was going to go, north. Bevel was already here. I was already here. So, okay. Because of the work that had already been done in Chicago, Martin Luther King made the decision that Chicago was the place. And who do you think went to Rochester, New York, and formed a group called Fight? Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky wanted to come to the West Side, but we'd already mobilized the West Side. Okay? Yeah. So I just want to give you that little tidbit in terms of history and the thing that made, okay, Chicago unique. And it was not working on one side of town. It was working on all levels. The South Side, the West Side, okay, the North Shore, and all of these places that made the difference. And it was working on multiple issues. So I wanted to come to a conclusion at this point so we can have some discussion back and forth. But the main thing I wanted to say before I conclude is that we need to understand why Martin Luther King was killed. I have not grieved over Martin Luther King's death. I have not shed not one tear. You know why? Now, when Martin Luther King was killed, I was with him that morning of April 4th in Memphis. After the march got broken up in violence, Martin Luther King wanted to stay and do the march over again. He wanted to bring, and so his staff, all of us there. Okay, T.Y. Rogers, Dr. Cotton, all of us were there. Jesse Jackson, Hosea Williams, all right? All of us were there. Abernathy, Andrew Young, all of us was there. And by the way, the reason the march was broken up in violence is because we did not plan well. Yeah, I'm willing enough to tell you the truth. All right? Yeah. We sent Martin Luther King up there without any trained marshals. He was just going to go up there and come back, he and Bernard Lee. We were not thinking that it was going to be a major movement. Martin Luther King just went up to give moral support. Got to have trained marshals, okay? Your marshals. Because if you don't have your marshals, guess what? The other folks will marshal you out. That's right. Always. That's one of the key things in terms of any demonstrations. Got to have marshals trained. So when it was broken up in violence, Martin Luther King had to do it over again, and so we went up. We were all there. Only one executive staff person from Atlanta was not up there in Memphis when it happened, and that was Bennett, who was over, Operation Breadbasket at that time. And the reason why Bennett was not there, because Bennett didn't fly. No, it would take too long to drive. He didn't fly in airplanes. That was not his movement. His movement was on the ground. Okay? All the rest of us there. So we're going to do a press conference in Washington, D.C., and Martin Luther King liked to stay on schedule, so he decided that he would send me to do the press conference. And I was there, and what happened was that morning we had to finish the statement, April 4th, because we got interrupted the night before because Martin Luther King was pulled away and had to go to Mason Temple. He didn't want to go. He was tired, worn out, and he had his pajamas on. He was in bed. And I was sitting, there in the chair, and we were working on a press statement. Got a phone call, said, Dr. King, you got to come. People are standing on the outside. More people on the outside than on the inside. And when we walked in, people just went, wow. So when they saw that you were not with us, because they did not see you, their feathers fell. But in preacher language, Abernathy say, this is your crowd. You know what I mean by that? This is your crowd. So he got up. On the phone, he said, now, do you mean you want me to get up out of my bed, take off my pajamas, and put on my suit and tie, and come out in the pouring down raining, and you know it's raining cats and dogs? And Abernathy said, yeah. That's what your friends can do to you sometime, Yeah, you got to go when they call. So he went out, and he was so excited when he got back. His mountaintop speech. No preparation. He was paperless. So the next morning we continued with the press statement, and I'm concluded at this point. We finished the press statement. I had to go. But the last words that Martin Luther King said to me that morning, April 4th, before I left for the airport to go to National Airport in D.C., he said, now, Bernard, the next movement we're going to have is to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence, to be discussed later. I said, okay. When I arrived in Washington, D.C., Walter Fauntroy was not there to meet me at the airport as he was scheduled to do. So I called the office to find out what in the world is going on here. And he told me that he had to go out in the streets because there was a riot. Martin Luther King had been shot. Okay, Martin Luther King had been shot. But I didn't think he was going to die. He had been stabbed before, remember? He didn't die. He'd been hit in the head with a brick. He didn't die. And while I was on the phone, I had two phones, one in each ear, battery of phones at the airport. UPI, United Press, okay, International, and AP, these are news media. They were reading ticker tapes that were coming directly from Memphis, one in each year. And nobody told me Martin Luther King died, but I knew he died when this reporter from UPI broke down in tears. I could hear him sniffling. He started crying. And maybe that's why maybe he cried for me too. Because see, nobody told me on the phone that Martin Luther King was dead. I knew when this reporter started crying, Martin Luther King had died. Wrapping up, I had to go and meet them in Atlanta because nothing I can do in Memphis. They were taking the body back to Atlanta. And there was nothing I could do in Memphis then. So we had to prepare for a funeral. Then we had to do a sanitation worker strike. Then we had to do this poor people's campaign without Martin Luther King. And I was a national coordinator. That's a book in itself. Okay, yeah. Now, I didn't have any experience in forensics. I didn't have any experience in investigating homicides and all that kind of stuff, okay? So I couldn't make any contribution there. I had to figure out how I'm going to institutionalize and internationalize nonviolence. So I went back to school because I had dropped out after the Freedom Rides, and I had to go to finish up my schoolwork and credits and everything at American Baptist College, got in law school at Boston University, and then went over to Harvard University. In other words, I got to work. I finished 3 degrees in 5 years. Oh, when I went to apply to Harvard University, they hired me 2 weeks later as assistant to the dean of admissions. I don't know what my interview was about. I wish I had been recording that, because whatever I said in the interview, okay, yeah. But Martin Luther King had promised me in Memphis that he was going to join me in Washington, D.C. as soon as he finished the march. He said, I'll be on up there. But he didn't tell me when. But he said he was coming. In conclusion, Martin Luther King, they shot him, killed him, okay? They put a hit on him. But they missed. Yeah. See, because the reason they shot him is because they wanted to stop that movement and all that Nobel Peace Prize stuff, etc. Martin Luther King was the only individual in the world who would call for an international boycott because they respected him. Okay? Nationality. Like Columbus got. Because Martin Luther King had discovered something. I don't know about Columbus, but I mean, and this is the only individual, and they celebrate his birthday all over 100 countries in the world. Isn't that something? Places he's never been before. There's only one person whose birthday is celebrated in more countries. JC himself. Okay? It was a hit, but it was a miss. They thought they were wiping him out. And they were painting a new sculpture. In fact, Martin Luther King said he was going to come and join me in Washington, D.C. And a few years ago, I looked up and there he was, 30 foot high. It was a hit, but it was a miss. They missed. Yeah. In fact, today even, we have Kingian nonviolent centers, Martin Luther King centers all over the world. And his curriculum is taught in universities and schools all over the world, training. 40,000 in Nigeria we trained, and now they're training others all over. And do you know those Nigerians who we trained? The government gave them amnesty, because they've been fighting the government down in Niger Delta. And guess what? The government has given them amnesty, and now they are in 24 countries being trained in all kinds of things. In Johannesburg, they're being trained how to fly airplanes. And the Nigerians are so smart, after they took the training, they became trainers of pilots. In fact, they got a new airline in Nigeria. It's a year old now. From some of those people we trained, they're flying airplanes instead of flying off the handle and shooting and killing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. You can Google it if you want to. It's called Air Peace. That's the name of the airline. Air Peace. See what nonviolence can do? They thought they had killed and destroyed Martin Luther King. And here he is, got an airline flying all over. It was a hit, but it's a miss. I'm glad they missed. And what are we talking about today? We are talking about a movement that Martin Luther King gave impetus to. Yeah, the freedom movement, Martin Luther King in Chicago. It was a hit, but it was a miss. Yeah. Thank you. Questions? Okay. I'm told we can entertain questions. Okay. There's one person there, one person there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, my brother. What's wrong? I'm just messing with you. I wanted to ask two questions. One is I'd like you to elaborate on the movement coming to the west side and why it came to the Warren Avenue Church as opposed to any of these other big churches. I think there are a lot of people that don't understand that history, and I think it's very important, especially in terms of some racial issues we have here in Chicago. Second question, you said a very revealing thing today, because I always had the impression that in Memphis, it was the District 65 United Auto Workers, then called the Distributive Workers, led by a wonderful trade unionist named Cleve Robinson, who had really talked Dr. King into coming to Memphis. And so you talked about the fact that there were no marshals in Memphis, and I'm trying to understand how a trade union movement, trade union-based movement of those sanitation workers did not have marshals there in Memphis. Because if nothing else, trade unionists by and large, of course Chicago is an exception sometime, but some of our trade unionists, know how to organize demonstrations and handle that part of it. Those two questions, Brother Bernard, I would appreciate, and I also wanted to say to you, I'm sure glad to hear you talking here in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Martin Luther King used to get about 11 invitations a day to go and speak places. And he couldn't go everywhere, so he had to pick and choose. He chose to go to Memphis, even though we're in the middle of our planning session with his directors, planning for the Poor People's Campaign in Atlanta. he came and told us that he had to go because he had not just gotten one phone call. There's been a series of phone calls from Memphis because the sanitation workers were, exhausted in the morale. If you're going to have a movement, one of the characteristics of a movement as opposed to a campaign is the sustainability, okay? That you have to be able to sustain it. It's like they walked 381 days in Montgomery, and they didn't have a timetable on it. They were not going back to those buses until the change came. And so my point is the sanitation workers were getting to the point of wondering whether or not things were going to change or they were going to get recognition. And at this time, SCLC was connected to the labor movement. Labor movement that gave great support to SCLC, like even here in Chicago, okay, and other places, New York. So Martin Luther King was always wanted to be in coalition with the labor movement. Cleve Robinson, as you mentioned, okay? A lot of photos with him at the March on Washington and other places, yeah. So these workers were already helping, with the labor movement because they wanted to be unionized. Now, I don't speak to things that I don't know anything about, so I don't know why they didn't have marshals. My speculation is this. He was coming to support the garbage strike workers. But when Martin Luther King came, lots of other people came and joined in who had not been there before. So that swelled the numbers, okay? So it was just a one-day march for Martin Luther King, but they were marching every day. So if they had marshals, they were not visible and were not trained to be marshals per se, okay? And that's the thing I said.
I'd like to address that.
Okay.
Reverend James Lawson, who was one of the best trainers in nonviolence, was pastoring the Methodist Church in Memphis.
Yes.
One of the phone calls went to him. But the thing happened so fast that he couldn't get the people organized. And the young people weren't ready to wait. And there were all varieties of young people. And a lot of them were not very controllable. And there were different groups of young people, too, that worked in their own way. There was a lack of coordination in Memphis. It happened too fast for either King at the national level or the trade unionists in Memphis, along with the churches and Jim Lawson. The thing just happened too fast, and they couldn't get the marshals together to control the situation. And then they had that riot.
Yes. And I was taking responsibility for saying that we, as SCLC executive staff, okay, should have checked that out. So that's why I'm saying that, we made an error. Because regardless of what the other folks didn't do or did, Martin Luther King was our president, and he was on a march, and we did not make sure he had trained marshals. We would have been there. That's the point. Okay, we would have been there, okay? But he went to Memphis as just, a quick stop. He hadn't planned on starting a campaign or a movement in Memphis. But these represented the working poor, these sanitation workers, okay? So it was not off the issue that he was working on. It was the timing, as he said, that ordinarily, even union demonstrations and things, they have trained marshals, okay? But, so that's the explanation. It was too fast. And sometimes you have to go slow if you want to go fast. So that didn't go too well initially. So, but it was Billy Cowes, all right, and Jim Lawson who called. And that's why Martin Luther King had to respond. And because he, had a relationship there. So the next question, I'm sorry.
About Warren Avenue Congregational Church as opposed to the Baptist churches.
Yes. Okay. Now, some of you already know this, but it's in the book as well. Chicago, in particular, had a history that caused people to be alienated from Martin Luther King. And there were two parts to it. The first part of the alienation was the geographical, cultural designation of certain communities. In other words, it was organized by ethnic groups. Okay? So you had the Italians in Cicero, you had, one group in Gage Park, and you got other groups in West Garfield Park, okay, Lawndale. So they were not just simply ethnic groups, they were political subunits. Because these different groups had aldermen, and they had, what do you call them? Precinct captains, ward committeemen, all right? In fact, Daley was the precinct captain of his area. He never stopped being the precinct captain. Yeah, it was clear structure, okay? Yeah. So the jobs, the city jobs, were allocated based on the number of votes that you could produce in your different communities. And some of the ministers, not all of them, but some of the ministers were being paid on a regular basis. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. My goodness. Yeah, $700. Yes, right. It was a business. They were involved in the business, all right? And there were certain religious groups in our day who said, we don't get involved with politics, okay? Because that's dirty politics, so we wash our hands of that. So they weren't participating in voting, okay? And, as I say, I'm getting old now, I can tell you the whole thing. There was a time, the black Muslims, they didn't get involved in that. In my day. The real evangelical folk who were dedicated totally to, their church, they said, no, we don't do that. Because the politicians are dirty, and we don't want to get our hands dirty. So we don't do anything about handling those unsanitary votes, okay? So, well, that's one part of it. So they were saying that they didn't need any Martin Luther King because they already were in the North, okay? Yeah, in fact, you had congressmen who were black from Chicago. So we don't have any problems here. Now, that's the other part that I was going to get to. There was a way of relating to a system, like Booker T. Washington. All right? So we don't need to be mixed with white folks, okay? They call it, oh, by the way, we used to call it racial mixing. Okay, yeah. But J.H. Jackson, when they changed the name of the street to Martin Luther King, he changed his address to the side street. The National Baptist Convention had two splits, and the last split was creating the Progressive Baptist Convention. And that was because some of the other advocates in the National Baptist Convention, preachers, of course, were trying to get Martin Luther King elected as the head of the Congress, the National Baptist Congress. J.H. Jackson did not agree with that because Martin Luther King was advocating, in his description, integration of the churches. Yeah. So he believed in keeping things separated. And he was not in favor of Martin Luther King influencing, this integration. So therefore, there were some churches where Martin Luther King was not allowed to speak. And Warren Avenue was one that was open to Martin Luther King. And was it Clay Evans was the other? Yeah, it's on the south side, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. So that's where he was allowed to speak, at Clay Evans Church. And Warren Avenue on the west side, all right? But there might have been one or two others, but not, open like it would other places, in other northern cities or in the south. And that's because of that closed society. And you see, when you talk about racism, y'all gonna run me out of here now. Racism is what you call a system. And it cannot survive unless you have all parts of the system working together. Like an automobile, okay? You may have a good brand new battery, engine and everything else, but you don't have no spark plugs. You can't get anything sparking. You can't get the car moving. You got to have some spark. And there was no spark in some of these places, okay? Because they were working, all right, with that system itself. That's why they couldn't have any movement. They were just static. And they felt that they didn't want change, okay? And the reason they didn't want change, black folks now, okay? And like you say, some of them haven't changed yet, right? Yeah. You know why people don't like change? Because it's uncertain. They know how things are now because they're in their place. And they've already designated that that's their place. So if they change their place, you see my point? It's uncertain. And that unpredictable and that mystery is the thing that caused the fear. And I know about fear. Fear can really paralyze people. Yeah, they're scared. All right. I remember when I was a little boy, a child. I was so scared, I don't know where it came from. I used to think ghosts were under my bed at night. Couldn't hardly sleep. Yeah, every little noise. I was just scared. And I didn't like it. And I didn't like myself either because I was scared. I used to feel so sad. So I had to get up enough nerve to say, I'm going to fight fear. And you know how I fought fear? I decided that the thing that was most scary to me than anything else was the graveyard. Because I heard about ghosts and things being in the graveyard. So I started walking through the graveyard at night. I put my shoulders back, started walking through the graveyard. And I was doing real good until that cat jumped out the tree. So I had to go back again. That's what you do. Wipe your leg off and go on back. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
When you talk about, in order for systems to exist, there are many different parts that have to participate in the system. And when you hear Bobby Rush coming out and apologizing for his vote regarding the Clinton era and incarceration, how do you understand the systems of today, specifically around incarceration and the school-to-prison pipeline, for example?
Well, unfortunately, apologies don't mean a thing unless there's change. Wallace apologized. But Alabama has not changed. Do you know what happened last year? Just like they did in Montgomery when they put out the flyers about the boycott. It was on the front page of the Montgomery Advertiser, a flyer recruiting for the Ku Klux Klan last year. And they would distribute them at where? Churches and high schools. Okay? Nobody likes change except a wet baby. So you have to struggle with that. So, like you talk about things today in Chicago, all right? The South, even the Supreme Court, they knocked out the pre-clearance. Wow, there was 140-some violations. So how are you going to say something is corrected when you still got 40-some violations? Yeah. I think that things have changed. It's an illusion. It is fear, and this is one of the reasons I'm here, is that young people, we're going to leave them here, by the way. Us older folk, we're going to leave the young folk, all right? We're not going to stay here forever. I don't know how long we're going to stay, but we're going to be gone at some point. And if we don't help them understand, okay, what's going on and through these systems, okay, it's going to be our fault, our grandchildren. So you live in a 200-year presence. You've been touched by those who've lived 100 years ago, including my great-grandmother, who was a slave girl. And then your grandchildren, their grandchildren, okay, maybe some of those who go to Mars, even for a visit. Now, I was talking to an elementary group, and they asked a lot of questions. You know, they don't have any problems. They just go on and on. And so at the end of my discussion, one of the little, elementary girls, and particularly girls, they don't have any problem asking questions, say, well, now, Dr. Lafayette, what can we do to make a difference and a change? I thought about it. And, of course, I say, I want to stick around as long as I can to see what you're going to do. You know what I mean? That's why I'm staying on my medication. So is there something we can do? You know what I told this girl, the class? I said, now, since we have this ability to figure out all kind of technology and we can tell what's going on in another country, and with these cell phones we can do this and look at the weather in another place and all that kind of business, et cetera. And, what they can do now, we used to have Dick Tracy, Dick Tracy's watch. But look what they got. They got these little cell phones. I said, well, what I need you to do is to figure out a way that you could slow down the rotation of the earth, and that means I can live longer. Yeah, because the earth will be, each day will be a little longer, you know what I mean? So I could live longer. She wrote that down. We owe it to them. So we've got to take this, okay, to them. In fact, Mary Lou, the next book we got to write is a children's book on Chicago. I just thought of that because I just talked about it, and so now we got to do it. Okay? Yeah, that's right. That'll be paperless. Okay, yes.
I just have a question about how do you
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. People had to be crazy to do what we did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Crazy in the positive sense of why is it that we are looking at the kind of conditions that exist and that sort of thing. Basically, the mental health, okay, is a very important issue. And there's a lot of research being done on that, just like in, research in cancer and AIDS and other kind of things, okay? In fact, the fellow who developed the cure for polio is from Chicago. Did you know that? Yeah, what's his name? Jonas Salk, yeah. He had a brother whose name was Bud Salk. Did you know that? Bud Salk was involved in the movement. Yeah, Bud Salk. We used his car and vehicles to take people down to Mississippi on the Meredith March and all that kind of thing. Mental health and the trauma and that sort of thing that people experience. So you mean the people who are involved in the change or the people who are just simply victims?
Well, both. But speaking from your point of view, I guess, or from being a part of that change.
Part of that change, yeah. Nonviolence is very important because it helps people to make the adjustment. Like, for example, when we were involved in the sit-in movement in other places, we had what we call role play, social drama. So we would act out what we were going to experience. Like when I was training the folk on the gang members on the west side to go sit in, we thought about every aspect of what would happen so they would not have any surprises. Because that creates trauma and that creates, kind of negative stress, okay? But if you're prepared for it, that's what boot camp is all about. If you're prepared for it, you already have what I call emotional education. Now, you may have be clear about your goals and what you're trying to accomplish and what you're going to do, etc. But what about your emotions? So emotional education is just as important as intellectual, education. So that's why we're prepared, and that's why the training is so important. Because now I have to admit something, okay? Again, I don't mind admitting it. The thing that caused me to have most stress is when I see what's happening to women and children. Okay? Now that's something I just have to continue to work on. I haven't gotten there yet. Here I am sitting on a stool in Nashville, okay, at the lunch counter, and this joker, and you can tell by my language now that I'm still working on it, right? This joker comes up with a match, strikes the match, and put it to the girl's hair. And you could hear the hair frying. You understand what I mean? This is not a photo or a picture. And this is me sitting right here next to this girl. And she's sitting there just as stoic. And what you gonna do? All right? And I started trying to put the fire out. You know what I'm talking about? Back of her head. And you know what she did? She turned to me and looked at me and said, "Don't interfere with my suffering." So I said to myself, what about my suffering? Now, if he put it on me, that'd be different. But here you sit there and burned up this girl's hair. You see what I'm talking about? And wigs are expensive, man. Yeah. And he's sitting up there. So I have to work on that, all right? Now, if it's one of my buddies or something like that, we all in it together, and we got to suffer together, et cetera, okay? But the emotional, stress is something that has to be considered. So you have to work on that. We can't role play that one now, But let me just say this, and then we can go to the next question, okay? When I was kidnapped in Colombia, all right, and when I say Colombia, I mean C-O-L-O, all right, Colombia, Latin America. Well, it was a march that we were having because the people in Caicedo had been surrounded by the FARC every time they come out with their coffee beans, and they would take some of the trucks away. They have 12 trucks. The FARC would take about 4. We trained them in nonviolence in terms of how to respond to people in Caicedo. It was a village up in the Andes Mountains, but it was in Antioquia, which is the state, you know, they call them departments. And when we trained them, and they surrounded the trucks. When the people from the village, about 2,000, surrounded the trucks, and the FARC backed off. But when they had their bumper crop, they went in there, and most of Catholics, and the priest had his rosary, and the FARC came in with a, butt of a gun, and hit the priest in the head, knocked him down, and then snatched the rosary and threw the rosary in the river. They just, So the governor, Gavilia, at that time, of Antioquia, decided to have a march to Caicedo, nonviolent march. He didn't even carry his army, And we got halfway up there, and the FARC sent word that if we go in that village, they were going to attack the village when we left. So we would jeopardize the people if we had gone into the village. So we negotiated and told the FARC we want to meet them at the city limits, the limits of the village. We won't go in, but we'll meet them and talk. So they agreed. So we got up there, and they made like they were going to negotiate with us, right? And we went in there, and they put guns on us, those of us who were going to be the negotiators. There were about 4 of us. And they finally, they had some others, but about 12, but they kept peeling them off, And they were mainly bishops, Catholic bishops. So they got us in there, and we knew we were kidnapped. So it was about 2:30, and I said, it's time for me to eat. This is past my lunch hour. Now I knew, because that if someone gets kidnapped, if your kidnappers don't kill you within 2 hours, there's a strong likelihood that they didn't kidnap you to kill you, but maybe to exchange you or get some ransom or something, So you have to understand this research, because, I train a lot of policemen. I've trained folks from the FBI to whatever other I, So I then had to take some action. So what I did was I said, it's past my lunch hour, I have to eat. So the guards didn't speak English. So I said, yo quiero comer. Pronto. Aquí. That means I want to eat right here, right now. And they started talking. I said, listo. That means the conversation is over. I was really doing some serious role play, you know what I mean? So there was a rock over there, so I went and sat on that rock. I was used to that at lunch counters, you know what I mean? Sitting down waiting to eat, that kind of thing. So they looked at me, and they say, gringo is mucho loco. They say, he must be crazy, think he's gonna. Well, the short of the story is that they evicted me from the kidnap situation because I demanded to eat, and the head of it, El Paiso, was not in the area, but he sent word, go ahead and feed him. okay? And so they fed all of us. So he was beginning to lose power. You see my point? Now, I could have been killed, yes, you know what I mean? See, the thing about nonviolence, and we got to go, is this, like Martin Luther King, my final word. Once you give your life to something that's important to you, nobody can take your life. It's too late when they come after you. I'm sorry, I already gave my life. So the important thing in your life is you got to find something that you're willing to die for, otherwise you haven't yet to live.
Thank you, Dr. Lafayette. I wanted to mention a couple of things while we prepare for the panel discussion, which is being moderated by Dr. Christoph Ringer. We have a wonderful day planned for you, and all of the information is in your app. So I just want to make sure that you are aware that lunch today is very interesting because you grab your lunch and you go to a lunch chat. So we'll continue to have engaging conversations over food. So I want to just mention what those lunch chats are and make sure that you go to those rooms with your lunch after the panel discussion. We have the Klonsky brothers in room 219, Jamie Calvin in room 118, Q&A with Dr. Mary Lou Finney in room 214, and there is an exciting admissions chat with our Director of Admissions, Lisa Seiwert, for anybody who's interested in learning about CTS and perhaps enrolling in seminary here. The other thing I wanted to mention is about an important partner with RIOTcon. That is the MLK Memorial. We are celebrating today the kickoff, so to speak, of a number of events and programs in Chicago that will commemorate the Chicago Freedom Movement. That will culminate in August with an installation of a wonderful piece of art in Marquette Park, as well as the 1,000-mile Journey March. So on your app, you can sign up for that march and to participate in those activities. It's under the partner section in the app. After lunch, there is, our Muslim brothers and sisters invite you to participate or attend the Jummah prayer with Imam Tahir Abdullah. That will be on the 3rd floor in the Learning Commons at 12:45 to 1:15. We're encouraging all of our conference participants to join us for all of our interfaith activities tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. We'll have a Shabbat service, and we had this morning an ecumenical service in the Clark Chapel with Dr. Terrell. So thank you. So we'll get ready shortly for our panel. So all of our panel speakers, if you just join us over here.